Peter B. Collins, News and Comment. It's Tuesday, January 31st, 2017. I took one day off to go skiing up at Lake Tahoe, and I'm playing a big game of catch-up today. This guy Trump moves awful fast. It's just one shitstorm after another. And before we get started, I want to thank all the people who watched my Facebook video. We went live on Friday as I recorded this News and Comment podcast, and hundreds, if not thousands, of people watched it over the weekend. So we're going to do it again. I'll be doing it on Fridays for the foreseeable future, and we'll see how it goes. So as I mentioned, a lot of chaos coming out of Washington, D.C., and Trump took an old page. You do something late on a Friday, and the media doesn't catch up for quite a while. And so Friday night at the Pentagon, with new Defense Secretary Mad Dog Mattis overlooking him, the president signed this executive order on immigration, a travel ban for people from 7 countries. And Mattis apparently didn't even know the details of this, and he was being used for this photo op. And I think it speaks volumes that Trump does not consult key members of his administration. And it appears that very few people were in the know on this rather expansive and idiotic travel ban that was signed into this executive order. And Trump now acts like these are royal decrees and that they must be implemented immediately without any question, and anybody who raises those questions and gets in the way can be mowed down in a minute with the famous Trump, "You're fired." And when we look at the basis behind this, it is fear, it's ignorance, and it's arrogance. Fear of terrorism that is virtually not a threat to the average American. Fear of Muslims, which is based on the insecurities of the people who harbor those fears, and stoked by the arrogance that Trump is going to protect us from all evil. And these actions in his first 10 days in office keep reminding me of George Lakoff. He is the linguist at the University of California, Berkeley, and he has famously defined the emotional bond of Republicans. And it's built around the stern father who knows what's best for us, and we all just get in line and accept that, we're not as good as he is and that he will protect us in this paternalistic way. And Trump is acting like the stern father. And in analyzing these moves, I first turned to Scott Shane at the New York Times. He's been a guest on this program many times. I don't always agree with Scott, but he wrote a think piece, a news analysis that was published in Sunday's paper, noting that since the September 11th attacks, no one has been killed in the United States in a terrorist attack by anyone who emigrated from or whose parents emigrated from the 7 countries that are the subject of this, at minimum, 4-month ban: Syria, Iraq, Iran, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and Yemen. And if you read the executive order, it was more like a press release, really. And we know it was largely written by Steve Bannon. There were 3 direct references to 9/11 as the motivation for this. Now, that was 16 years ago. Nonetheless, those fears have been kept alive by first Bush and then Obama, and it leaves many people ripe for picking. And when you actually look at the statistics, 123 people have been killed in the United States by Muslim terrorists since the 2001 attacks. And out of that total, we've had more than 230,000 killings by gang members, drug dealers, angry spouses, white supremacists, psychopaths, drunks, and people of every description. So, at most, 1 over 1,870 is the fraction of the risk of some sort of a terrorist attack. And as you know, the ones that are cited, San Bernardino, the Boston Marathon, the Orlando shooter, each one of these cases is undermined by interference by the government. For example, in the San Bernardino case, I am still waiting for the FBI to release the alleged Facebook post that the woman made, either during or after the shootings. We were told she pledged allegiance to al-Baghdadi. We've never seen that. Omar Mateen, the alleged shooter in Orlando, we ignore the fact that he was a conflicted, closeted homosexual Muslim. And the FBI ignores the altercations he had with deputy sheriffs when he was a private security guard at the courthouse in Port Lucie, whatever it is, in Florida. And the Boston Marathon case, we know that the elder Tsarnaev brother had contact with the FBI and the CIA before these actions occurred. So every one of these cases that is now cited as a proven terrorist event in the United States has serious questions about it that the corporate media and our political leaders never address. And Trump said that this whole thing is about deep vetting, extreme vetting. But he didn't bother to extremely vet or even lightly vet the executive order that he signed. And this is the kind of action, repressive action, that targets people. He says it's not about religion, but it's obviously about religion. The exception for Christians prove that. Or it's enough proof to any Muslim extremist to cite. And so this effort is going to be celebrated by people who want to use the threat of terrorism to force America to cower under the table, to lift up the drawbridge of Fortress America, and declare that that's what's going to make us safe. It is truly ignorant. And Kevin Gosztola is another analyst who did a great job in taking this apart. He quotes the New America Foundation: the large majority of jihadi terrorists in the United States have been American citizens or legal residents. And while a range of citizenship statuses are represented, every jihadist who conducted a lethal attack inside the United States since 9/11 was a citizen or a legal resident. That's lost on the Trump supporters who just say, cheer him on, and get those Quran-wielding idiots and infidels out of my face. And the idea that we're going to ban refugees of every description, including women and children, for at least 4 months, and if not forever, is deeply offensive to anyone who has a heart. He's cut by more than half the number of refugees who might be admitted in the coming year. And Gosztola quotes Farhana Kira, president of Muslim Advocates. This relies on grotesque and bigoted stereotypes about Muslims and Islam perpetuated by hate groups. This bigotry will now be elevated to the level of official U.S. government policy. Yes, it will. And, of course, we got the dissent memo from tens of career Foreign Service officers at the State Department, dismissed by Sean Spicer, the White House mouth. I was going to say mouthpiece, but he's just a mouth. And he threatened them. He said, get with the program or get out. And that is the mentality of Trump. If you're in my way, we will mow you over, bowl you over, put you under the bus, whatever metaphor you like. And we have a couple of courageous women here, including the judge, Ann Donnelly, who courageously on Saturday night issued the stay and ordered our customs and immigration officials to admit anyone who had a valid visa or who was on their way to the United States with a valid visa. Now, this is very short term. It doesn't even help people who are planning to travel to the United States today, who are stuck somewhere because of this dragnet, very extreme, broad measure that targets people by class, by group, and it's just mind-boggling. The other courageous woman for a moment was Sally Q. Yates. She was the Deputy Attorney General who was acting Attorney General because Jeff Sessions has not yet been confirmed. And she announced on Monday afternoon that she would not be appealing the court decisions that struck down the executive order, the royal decree, that Trump signed on Friday night. So, in short order, the president fired her. And he has the legal authority to do that. It's not very smart. But he, of course, tells us just how smart he is all the time. And they found a willing guy. He's even a Democrat, apparently, a Virginia U.S. attorney named Bente. And he said, okay. They swore him in at 9 o'clock on Monday night, and he rescinded Ms. Yates' order shortly thereafter. Yates had written, "At present, I am not convinced that the defense of the executive order is consistent with the responsibilities as Attorney General, nor am I convinced that the executive order is lawful." So I give her credit for that. And then we get this same black and white. You know, she is a disloyal American, a disloyal Attorney General. And so Trump doesn't allow for intellectual differences, for rational distinctions, for debate. Nope, it's his way or the highway. And I think we're going to see, in short order, some of his appointees bail. I think that there's going to be high turnover in the Trump administration. Now, tens of thousands of people have been affected by this ban. And there are many stories that we will never know. Because a student couldn't return to the United States to complete his or her course after going home to one of these 7 nations for the holidays. So far, the high-ranking Iraqi official who was in Washington as recently as last week is banned from travel to the United States. The Iraqis are going neener, and they are toying with the idea of banning Americans from traveling into Iraq. Now, I don't have a desire to go to Club Med in Mosul right now, but I am trying to schedule an interview with Peter Byrne. He's the journalist who was a guest on this program last year. He recently traveled to Iraq. I believe he was in Erbil. And he just texted me from Frankfurt. He's on his way back to the U.S., and so later this week I hope to get an interview with him, and we'll see if the travel ban and the reaction in Iraq had any impact on his freedom to travel. But let's just take one of these stories. There are 2 Yemeni brothers who were detained by U.S. immigration officials on Saturday, and they were unlawfully coerced into giving up their green card rights and forced to return to Ethiopia just hours after Trump signed that executive order. They are Tarek Aziz and Ammar Aziz. They were handcuffed, detained, forced to sign papers that they neither read nor understood, then placed on a flight back to Addis Ababa hours after arriving at Dulles International Airport outside Washington. The 2 brothers were on their way to Michigan to reunite with their father, a U.S. citizen who lives in Flint. And according to a lawsuit, the Aziz brothers, who are 19 and 21 years old, were forced to sign an I-407 form which abandoned their claims to lawful permanent residency in the United States. We've also learned that people were required to cough up the coordinates, the username and password for their social media. And you can narrowly say that we have the right to impose unconstitutional measures and practices on people who are not U.S. citizens. But I believe it's a slippery slope, and you and I will be submitting to it soon. When they came for the Muslims, were you silent? Well, tens of thousands of people decided to go to airports and protest this. It started at JFK, the kind of first scene of the crime, and then it spread like wildfire. And if you went to an airport and protested this weekend, I thank you. Because we need to maintain public expression of disavowal of these mean-spirited, irrational, and indefensible moves. So Trump has sacked the guy who was running the Border Patrol. Mark Morgan was fired last week because the union that endorsed Trump wanted him out. He was just the acting guy running the Border Patrol. And likewise, Trump has sacked the head of Immigration and Customs, also known as ICE, and plugged in a guy named Homan. His name is Thomas Homan. He's been the Associate Director of Enforcement and Removal Operations, the major deporter at the Department of Homeland Security and its subset of Immigrations and Customs Enforcement. And he's a 33-year veteran of law enforcement who apparently knows how to say yes, sir. Meanwhile, across the pond in Britain, now 1.6 million people have signed a petition calling for a debate over what treatment to give Donald Trump when he comes to visit later this year. And the 1.6 million people have spawned a debate in the Parliament, which is going to be scheduled for the 20th of February. And the issue is they're saying that Trump should be allowed to enter Britain in his capacity as head of the U.S. government, but he should not be invited to make an official state visit because it would cause embarrassment to Her Majesty the Queen. Quote, Trump's well-documented misogyny and vulgarity disqualifies him from being received by Her Majesty or the Prince of Wales. Therefore, during the term of his presidency, Trump should not be invited to the UK for an official state visit. We also have 500,000 Americans who have already signed a petition calling for the impeachment of Donald Trump. Every day I pause for a second to thank the people who support my work here at the Peter B. Collins Podcast with your subscriptions and generosity. Here's a note from Craig, who's in North Bend, Oregon, and he just decided to send in some cash. He said, I want to be a supporter rather than a subscriber, lest I be tempted to bootleg your words. Well, bootleg them all you want, Craig. And you can define yourself as a donor or a subscriber. However you choose to support me, I very much appreciate it. In Florida, Ann Bryant surprised me with an extra contribution over the weekend. Ann, thank you very much. I really appreciate that. Andy Krieger and Bob Getzla. Bob's a TV technician and engineer. They both renewed their annual subscriptions. Way to go, folks. I really appreciate that. And while we're at it, let's mention Jim McHugh and Mona Kobus. They're both monthly subscribers who recently made a contribution to the Peter B. Collins Podcast, and I appreciate it. If you'd like to join these ranks, come on over to peterbcollins.com. I need your support. You click on the menu button, pull it down, click on Become a Subscriber, takes you to the sign-up page, and from there you can choose $5, $10, $20 a month, the $50 annual subscription, or you can make a contribution of any amount by PayPal or just by sending cash, a check, or money order to Box 100, Mill Valley, California, 94942. That address is listed on the sign-up page as well. So yesterday I went up to Lake Tahoe. I stayed in a flea bag motel. I managed to pay the motel bill by winning $45 at the craps table on Sunday night. That was fun. But I flipped on the tube, and there was the Donald signing another goddamn executive order. And this one is crazier than some of the others. It's a 2-for-1 deal on regulations. And it's like Trump is a game show host. And he's trying to make the point, and I understand it's a potent point for Republicans, that we got too much damn regulation and he's going to cut through the thicket of it. And around the world, there are other countries that have had this kind of 2-for-1. We get rid of 2 regulations for each new one that we adopt. And others have used a kind of budget for regulation. You measure how much they cost and you set a budget so that you don't put too many regulations on at one time. Now, all of this I find really detached from reality, because regulation should be adopted based on need, based on problems that need to be corrected, based on people who don't do the right thing and need government to tell them to do the right thing. And so Trump decided to do both. Starting in budget year 2018, we'll have a regulation budget. But starting right now, he said that if there's a new regulation, they have to knock out 2. And he said he's not going to sign it or approve any new regulations. So in many ways, this is empty. It's just bullshit. It's just posturing. But over at Politico, and I've linked to this article in the show file for today's podcast at peterbcollins.com, they raise 5 questions about Trump's executive order. Number 1, what constitutes a regulation? Because, for example, there are regulations about whether postal carriers can carry mace and, whether they can use it on your dog. Is that as important as a regulation about a nuclear power plant, where a meltdown could affect millions of people? Well, Politico points out there's no accepted definition of what constitutes a regulation. It is maddeningly vague. There's also the issue of what agencies are covered. And they make the point that I think I have. An agency making $5 billion worth of new regulation doesn't have to repeal $10 billion worth. It just has to offset the $5 billion while cutting twice the number of regulations. It could enact 5 $1 billion rules and repeal 10 $500 million rules. And that's just one way to slice this baby. How will costs be defined? And who determines them? Who is the arbiter of what the cost of a regulation is? An industry is going to claim that any regulation hurts it much more than it really does. And the 5th question is, does the president even have the legal power to mandate a cap on the number of regulations? These are details that obviously would never be considered by a guy like Trump, who's determined to move in a dizzying way, partly to keep his opponents off base, because here I am responding to things that happened 3 or 4 days ago, and he's still just churning forward. He's going to announce his Supreme Court nominee tonight on primetime TV, and the show rolls on. One of the other additions over the weekend was naming Steve Bannon, Mr. Alt-White, Alt-Right, to the Principals Committee of the National Security Council. This is a big change. David Axelrod, Karl Rove, they did not have a seat. They occasionally attended meetings where there were issues that they were called upon to discuss. But they didn't have a designated seat, and they didn't bump out the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff to make room for a guy like Steve Bannon. And since the order was announced, they did step back on one issue, and they have renewed the seat for the CIA director in the Principals Committee of the NSC. We have reports of a draft regulation regarding the a proposed shift, in the authority related to cybersecurity. Currently, it's controlled by the NSA and the Cyber Command, and the Department of Homeland Security does have a role. But apparently DHS will be downgraded, and the Pentagon will have a co-equal role, which would give the military, the first time, a deeper role into civilian digital protection. Now, I believe this violates the Posse Comitatus Act, because I don't believe the U.S. military is permitted to operate in the United States. But this is another distinction that is lost on people like Trump, and it may be litigated down the road, but chances are he'll try to impose this new regime first. And this is discouraging. Trump is scheduled to meet this afternoon with Rudy Giuliani to talk about cybersecurity. On Friday, more confirmation came out of Moscow about a purge of top officials related to the Russian Cyber Command. 2 intelligence officers who worked on cyber operations and a Russian computer security expert have been arrested and charged with treason for providing information to the United States. And there are rumors in Moscow that those arrested may be scapegoats in an internal power struggle over the hacking in the United States. Now, what's interesting is that the information coming out of Russia indicates that the hacking involved is not the alleged hacking of the DNC. It was not the alleged hacking by Russia of John Podesta's emails. It was the hacking of computer systems at state election boards, including Arizona and Illinois. Now, we're told that there was no manipulation of the vote process or the vote count, but this is very interesting because I've seen corporate media actors like Rachel Maddow claim that this is the smoking gun, the proof that Russia hacked our elections. And I'm sorry, friends, I remain skeptical. This is not proof. It's interesting. It's circumstantial evidence that may ultimately lead to evidence. But even the New York Times says, hey, ever since American intelligence agencies accused Russia of trying to influence the American election, there have been questions about the proof they had to support the accusation. That's me. I'm still looking for proof. Well, we're now learning that, according to anonymous government leakers, once again, that human sources in Russia did play a crucial role in the assessment by our intelligence community that Russia did try to manipulate our election. But that is not any kind of substantial proof. And we're seeing this go in circles once again, where I saw it at Daily Kos. They seize upon this and say there's a purge. That means that Russia is guilty. There could be many explanations, including that Russia is guilty. But we do not have that evidence before us today, and that doesn't seem to trouble many people who want to jump to conclusions. So I'll continue to monitor this and look for the evidence that we need. And you may know that one of these guys, Sergei Mikhailov, was subjected to a very dramatic arrest. He was at some meeting of the top FSB leadership, and cops stormed the room. A bag was placed over his head, and he was frog-marched out. Isn't that beautiful? Here's a look at the Trump effect in Victoria, Texas, early Saturday morning. A fire broke out at the Islamic Center of Victoria. The fire started around 2 a.m. and largely destroyed the facility. It collapsed. It had been the scene of a burglary and vandalism in recent times. I consider this the Trump effect. I don't know who did it, and I am openly speculating here. But the hatred that he has unleashed, the bias against Muslims, clearly has an impact on certain people. And we have this suspect in Canada. His name is Alexander Bissonnette, charged with 6 counts of murder at a mosque in Quebec City. 8 people were also wounded when a man walked in and started shooting. Now, initially, Fox News and the White House said that this was a Moroccan Muslim and offered the unproven conclusion that this was a terrorist act. Well, it turns out that Alexander Bissonnette idolizes Marine Le Pen, the separatist in France, and also a guy named Donald Trump. Trump's picture's on his Facebook page. Maybe that's why the White House and Fox News wanted to divert our attention to Morocco and a Muslim. This man is well known to Canadian law enforcement authorities, and he is neither Moroccan or Muslim. Democrats in the Senate are taking heat from the grassroots because they talk a tough game and then vote to confirm so many of Trump's cabinet officers. And Sheldon Whitehouse from Rhode Island was at a town hall meeting and took it on the chin yesterday. He had to tell the crowd that he will be voting against a number of Trump's nominees. There was a protest of a couple of hundred people at Dianne Feinstein's mansion here in San Francisco over the weekend. And Elizabeth Warren is feeling the heat as well. So today, Ron Wyden organized the Democrats on the Senate Finance Committee, and he kind of double-crossed the committee chairman, Orrin Hatch, because last night he said, well, we're not going to vote tonight because we want to attend this vigil over at the Supreme Court building. A lot of the Democrats went to that protest. He said we can do it 12 hours later. And then this morning, he led this boycott where all of the Democrats on that committee failed to show up in concert, denying a quorum so that they could not move on the nominations of Tom Price to dismantle Obamacare at Health and Human Services and Steven Mnuchin, the president's nominee for the Treasury Department. Mnuchin is being accused of lying And Tom Price has these problems where he's been investing in companies that benefit from legislation that he has offered, healthcare companies, pharmaceutical companies. But in the end, will the Democrats actually be able to scuttle a single nominee of Donald Trump, including the right-wing justice that he will name to the Supreme Court tonight? I doubt it. And here's some evidence. Betsy DeVos, this billionaire who bought her appointment to head the Department of Education, her family's donated tens of millions of dollars to Republicans. Betsy DeVos, her nomination cleared the Senate committee today on a party line vote 12-11. Now, at least in this case, all 11 Democrats voted in unison. But this shows that the Democrats can make some noise, they can ask tough questions, they can posture all they want. But unless they can peel off at least 2 Republican votes in the committee and at least 3 Republican votes on the Senate floor, they're just whistling past the graveyard and misleading their followers that they actually plan to stop these nominations. The Supreme Court will be the ultimate test, and I don't have confidence that the Democrats will be able to pass that test. I want to recommend 3 items at The Intercept. First of all, they reported yesterday that in his first drone strike of the new administration, Donald Trump managed to kill 10 civilians or more in Yemen, innocent people including women and children. And the grisly continuity with Obama's drone strikes is quite telling. Now, this particular action was planned by the Obama team, and they left it for Trump to decide to approve it or not. And he sent SEAL Team 6 in. This is some kind of a retribution operation. 1 American soldier was killed in that raid. But the attacks from the air also killed an 8-year-old girl whose name is al-Awlaki. And she is the 3rd victim of American drone strikes in Yemen who is an American citizen. She's the daughter, the 8-year-old daughter of Anwar al-Awlaki. I mentioned Scott Shane earlier in the podcast today. He wrote a great book about the Awlaki killing. I didn't agree with everything that he said in the book, but it was a good reporting job. 2 weeks after al-Awlaki was killed, his 16-year-old son, Abdul Rahman al-Awlaki, was killed. We're told variously that it was a mistake or that he shouldn't have been there. But now, this latest raid, which killed 30 people, including 10 women and children, also included the daughter of Anwar al-Awlaki, Nasser al-Awlaki. Ah, boy, you can't make this stuff up. And finally today, I want to commend The Intercept. As you know, I've been a longtime critic of the FBI, going back to the 1970s. And I remain critical of this agency that operates above the law, without oversight, without accountability. And at The Intercept, they have launched an 11-part series. It was all dropped, I think, in one day because I didn't see it there before. And it examines various aspects of the FBI, and The Intercept got a hold of their secret rules. And that's what this series is based on. And it is too lengthy to try to summarize all of this for you today. I'm linking to the lead article by Glenn Greenwald and one of the 11 sub-stories written by Trevor Aronson. He's a great journalist who's been on this program several times. He wrote the book about the frame-ups of domestic terrorism cases in this country. And he is very adept in dealing with issues related to the FBI. And in the piece that he contributed to this series, he wrote 4 of them, but one of them details the secret slush fund that the FBI controls to pay its informants. And some of them, one guy earned $4.9 million squealing to the FBI. And I don't know if Alex Diaz explicitly helped frame people, but that's what many of these paid informants have done. And I commend The Intercept for really pulling the screen back that obscures the very powerful agency called the FBI. Thanks for joining me today for News and Comment. This podcast is available on YouTube. I remain Peter B. Collins.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails to you. Keep smiling.